You're not crazy. At least, not in the way you're being told. Picture this. You remember a conversation clearly. What was said, how it made you feel, the exact moment something shifted. You bring it up later, and the other person looks at you, calm, almost bored, and says, "That never happened." Not angrily, not defensively, just confidently. And in that moment, something subtle breaks. Not the argument, your trust in your own mind. That's where gaslighting lives. Not in shouting, not in insults, but in quiet certainty. And here's the uncomfortable truth most people miss. Gaslighting doesn't start by convincing you of a lie. It starts by making you doubt a fact you already know is true. That's why this matters right now, because gaslighting isn't rare, it isn't dramatic, and it isn't always intentional. It's woven into relationships, workplaces, families, politics, even social media. And most people don't realize they're in it until they've already adjusted their reality to survive it. Let's talk about how it actually works. Not the textbook definition, not the viral buzzword version, the real mechanism. Imagine your mind as a GPS. It constantly recalibrates based on feedback, what you see, what others confirm, what feels consistent. Gaslighting is a system designed to quietly feed your GPS bad data. Not all at once, that would be obvious. Instead, it works in steps. Step 1 is destabilization. The gaslighter doesn't deny everything. They deny small, specific things, details, tone, intent. You're taking it the wrong way. You're too sensitive. That's not what I meant. Notice what's happening here. They're not saying you're wrong about the event. They're saying you're wrong about your perception. And perception is harder to defend than facts. You can prove what was said. You can't easily prove how it landed. So you start explaining yourself, and the moment you explain yourself, you've already stepped onto their terrain. Step 2 is authority. At some point, the gaslighter positions themselves as more reliable than your own memory. They might do it softly. I remember things pretty clearly. I would never say something like that. You know I'm not that kind of person. This is where the irony kicks in. The calmer they are, the more unhinged you feel. Because now the contrast isn't between two versions of reality, it's between calm confidence and your growing confusion. And humans are wired to trust confidence, especially when it's steady, especially when it's repeated. Which brings us to the uncomfortable math. Repetition beats accuracy. Not because the lie is stronger, but because your brain is built to resolve uncertainty as fast as possible. Living in doubt is exhausting, so eventually your mind makes a trade. I might be wrong feels safer than they're lying to me on purpose. And that's the turning point. Step 3 is internalization. This is where gaslighting becomes self-sustaining. You start editing yourself before speaking. You soften your memory. You add disclaimers. I might be wrong, but maybe I'm imagining this. I don't know if this makes sense. At this stage, the gaslighter doesn't have to do much anymore. You've become the enforcer. Here's the quiet humor in all of this, if we can call it that. Gaslighting doesn't require intelligence. It requires consistency. Some of the most effective gaslighters aren't masterminds. They're just stubborn, or emotionally uncomfortable, or deeply invested in never being wrong. Sometimes they don't even know they're doing it. Which leads to an important contrast. The hype version of gaslighting paints it as a villain tactic, a calculated manipulation, a sinister plan. The reality is messier. Most gaslighting happens because someone can't tolerate guilt, accountability, or loss of control. So instead of adjusting their behavior, they adjust your reality. Zoom out for a moment. Why is this especially dangerous now? Because we live in an environment where reality itself feels negotiable. Screenshots can be dismissed, context can be reframed, tone can be reinterpreted endlessly, and social pressure rewards confidence, not accuracy. So when gaslighting enters a system like that, a workplace, a relationship, a community, it doesn't just confuse individuals, it destabilizes trust at scale. People stop speaking clearly, stop confronting directly, stop trusting their own judgment, And systems built on confused people are easy to control. That's the bigger risk. Gaslighting isn't just emotional manipulation, it's epistemic erosion. It erodes your ability to know what you know, and once that's gone, everything else becomes negotiable. Now here's the part most explainers avoid. The way out isn't to trust yourself more. That sounds nice. It's also useless advice when your self-trust has already been damaged. The real counter to gaslighting is external anchoring. Not validation from the gaslighter, from reality. Writing things down, checking timelines, comparing notes with people who aren't invested in the outcome. Not to prove the other person wrong, but to stabilize your internal compass. And here's the paradox in all of this. The moment you stop trying to convince the gaslighter, the power dynamic shifts, because gaslighting only works when your reality needs their approval. So let's end with an unresolved question. If someone repeatedly makes you doubt your memory, your feelings, and your interpretation of events, and they never seem confused, never uncertain, never willing to examine themselves, ask yourself this. Is the problem really your perception? Or is it that their version of reality requires your self-doubt to survive? Sit with that, because the answer isn't always obvious, and that's exactly why gaslighting works. So let's end with an unresolved question. If someone repeatedly makes you doubt your memory, your feelings, and your interpretation of events, and they never seem confused, never uncertain, never willing to examine themselves, ask yourself this. Is the problem really your perception? Or is it that their version of reality requires your self-doubt to survive? Sit with that, because the answer isn't always obvious, and that's exactly why gaslighting works. Because once you see that dynamic clearly, something changes. You stop arguing details, you stop chasing validation, you stop negotiating your sanity, and that's usually when control quietly collapses. If this video gave language to something you felt but couldn't explain, if it helped you spot a pattern instead of blaming yourself, stay here. Subscribe. Not because this channel has answers, but because understanding manipulation is a skill, and skills get sharper with practice. There are more patterns like this hiding in plain sight, and once you learn to see them, they don't work the same way anymore. The most dangerous manipulation isn't loud. It's the kind that makes you question your own mind. And now that you're aware of it, what do you do next?